Batida, meaning beat in Portuguese, is used as a collective term for recent forms of electronic dance music associated with the Afrodiasporic DJs of Lisbon, first or second generation immigrants from Portugal's former colonies, especially Angola, Guinea Bissau, Cabo Verde and Tomé, Príncipe. Batida is influenced and seen as an evolution of the EDM musics emanating from these countries, especially the kuduro and tarraxinha of Angola. Like kuduro, this is a sound that, while occasionally making reference to older styles, is contemporary music created on digital audio workstations such as FL Studio. Recent years have produced extensive coverage of the Batida scene in English language publications such as Vice, Thump, Fact, The Wire and Resident Advisor. In a global EDM scene still dominated by Anglo-American understandings of popular music, Batida is often compared to Chicago footwork and grime, just as fado has often been compared to the blues. The translation is a two-way process, with musicians taking on the role of explaining their music through extra-cultural references. This paper uses these attempts at musical translation as a prompt to explore issues of strangeness and encounter in responses to Batida, and to situate them in the broader context of discourse around global pop. I'll start by playing two short clips of music from the Batida scene, the first by DJ Marfox and the second by DJ Leacox. While doing so, I'll flag the tropes of strangeness and futurity that frequently shape the writing about this music. The strangeness that music journalists often hear in the music is underlined by the records on which it appears. This is especially the case with those released by the Lisbon-based Príncipe discourse, one of the prominent labels leading the local and international promotion of Batida, the other being Enchufada. Both the clips we've just heard were released by Príncipe and made available on Bandcamp as limited edition vinyl releases and permanently available digital downloads. The records come with labels and sleeves that contain little or no written contextual information, but share a common visual aesthetic via the artwork of label co-founder Márcio Matos. Written context is provided on the Bandcamp pages, normally in the form of evocative texts written by the label staff. The sense of confusion that comes through many of the responses to Batida is arguably part of a broader set of responses to music being released in a period of hyperconnectivity and overwhelming choice. As Ben Ratliff writes at the start of his book Every Song Ever, sounds are running ahead of our vocabularies for describing them. The feelings of disorientation, of not knowing what process makes what sound, of not really understanding what producers do, are question marks now built into our hearing. If strangeness and futurity have been themes associated with the sound of Batida, as evidenced by the way the genre has been written about, how do we start to translate it into some form of familiarity? One obvious answer lies in what the music is most obviously made for. As one Guardian review noted, although it might sound alien at first, this is party music. After the sense of disorientation subsides, your feet take over. And perhaps this is the most obvious and immediate way we can theorize the translation of any new EDM genre. How does it translate to the dance floor? I'll return to that obvious and not to be ignored point later. But first I want to reconsider how the genre gets translated into words, not least because that's what many of us attending and presenting at academic conferences are in the business of doing. For many listeners, curiosity remains beyond the dancing moment. Another way to get a handle on this sound, then, is through the information that comes with the releases. As already noted, the Príncipe team have proven themselves adept in providing compelling backstories and contextual spin. And I use that term in a positive way, both to acknowledge the need for PR and also as a DJ relevant term. There has also been the media coverage mentioned earlier, and it's here that we often find the challenges of translation in full effect. Translation, as Umberto Eco observed, is about negotiation. How do I negotiate the communicative, signifying concepts emerging from your world through reference to my own? How do you begin to explain these things to me? The answer tends to be that we do so by finding common ground, by looking for the concepts we both recognize, even if our signs for them differ. And because we can't find precise equivalencies, we negotiate. It's little wonder then that given the task of explaining new music to their audiences, fans and journalists often reach for the already familiar. In the case of Batida, the already familiar for the Anglophone writer and reader might be footwork or grime. Sometimes it's the reviewer or feature writer who makes the connections. Sometimes, as in this fact article, it's the artists themselves. It's negotiation after all. If genres are in negotiation with each other, they're also influenced by each other. Angolan kuduro developed as a localized response to American house music. And that legacy doesn't disappear when kuduro gets reworked in Portugal. But America is not the dominant player here, and to start to understand the way such musics travel, we should look to parallel scenes such as the dance music cultures of South Africa, Brazil, and Uganda. And also to a connected global network of music, clubs and scenes, stitched together, however loosely, through festivals, club nights, samples, set lists, SoundClouds and social media. This is the kind of work being undertaken by writers such as Jace Clayton in his book Uproot, by the Norient team behind the Seismographic Sounds project, by Jana Brown in her work on the utopian impulse in global pop scenes, and by Noel Lobley in his account of Chicago footwork, Shangaan Electro, and Grime. Lobley refers to the producers and consumers of these three as hyperactive communities, and part of the hyperactivity is the sheer speed with which these sounds travel around the world, via the kind of global networks I've just mentioned. The sounds and the files and the spin travel fast, promoting new negotiations and translations as sound cargoes are unloaded into new harbours. We also have to look to local contexts too, and with this in mind, I will say something about Lisbon before returning to the broader world of global pop. I want to consider the segregation of sound and the way in which sound acts as a marker of place and regional identity, while simultaneously offering the promise of crossing borders, mixing and miscegenating. Prior to starting to negotiate my understanding of Batida, first as record buyer, later as researcher, my encounters with the musical life of Lisbon had mostly been connected to the city's fado music, which I started researching in earnest more than 15 years ago. My work on fado sought to emphasize the connection between the fado and the city of Lisbon, and so did the work of other scholars such as Michael Colvin and Lila Gray. This work challenged stereotypes about fado as Portugal's national music, but ultimately maintained such identifications. With regard to the World Music Network that developed in the 1980s and 1990s, I've often felt that the end result is a kind of United Nations General Assembly, where each country or region or genre is entitled to one representative artist, genre or style, who stands for that body. Genre and nation are often conflated in this process, so that Spain is mostly represented by flamenco, Greece by rebetiko, Argentina by tango, Mali by kora players or griots, tuva by throat singers, Portugal by fado singers. As an example of world music 2.0, Batida has the potential to challenge the world music network, as it threatens to displace fado as the music representative of Lisbon or Portugal. However, rather than thinking that the torch has been passed from Marisa to Marfox, it's probably more accurate to suggest that these sounds of Lisbon are heard as parallel networks, other channels, where what many have been calling world music 2.0, or outer national music, are hipper and more important than the trad tendencies of world music. Even though Pitchfork described DJ Marfox in 2014 as ambassador for this music around the world, a role which artists such as Marisa and Ana Moura had previously taken for fado, these worlds have been unlikely for the most part to meet. Fado and Batida are generally mapped onto very different parts of the city. The former in the central and downtown areas shown in red on this map of Lisbon, the latter in the peripheral neighbourhoods such as Quinta do Mocho, where several of the Batida DJs live, including scene founders Nervoso and Marfox. Quinta do Mocho is just next to and above the airport, which is visible at the top right of this map. And you can see Quinta do Mocho just next to the airport runway on this aerial view. This geographical aspect is what most commentators on the Batida scene highlight when tracing its origins, noting the disconnections that exist between the city centre and outskirts in terms of public transport and other infrastructural elements. To move between downtown tourist spots of Baixa Chiado and Alfama and the so-called social neighbourhoods of Quinta do Mocho or Cova de Moura is to move through multiple Lisbons. The latter areas haven't been completely immune from the massive rise in tourism that Lisbon has witnessed over the past decade. Tours of the former ghettos are available for those willing to seek them out. But the geo and demographic fragmentation of these spaces remains a powerful reminder of the legacies of post-colonialism. Within Quinta do Mocho, though, attempts are being made to address the fragmentation via three locally organised strategies: to bring people to the neighbourhood, to report knowledge of the neighbourhood to the world, and to create local jobs. The first of these has been quite successful. I just mentioned tours of the former ghettos, and in Quinta do Mocho's case, this involves taking visitors to see the more than 100 artworks adorning the outsides of the buildings, transforming the status of the neighbourhood from ghetto to bairro de arte pública, or public art neighbourhood. Connections between music and space are remembered here, as in these murals of DJ Nervoso, a founding member of the DJs do Gueto and mentor to DJ Marfox, and fado star Amalia Rodrigues. If the first aim of bringing visitors to a once feared neighbourhood has been a success, there is less certainty around the other aims of increasing Quinta do Mocho's visibility outside of Lisbon and of securing work for its residents. Nevertheless, the neighbourhood provides a compelling example of an attempt at reassembling the social. In adopting that term from Bruno Latour's account of actor network theory, I'm thinking of the necessity to recognise the multiple actors who create, maintain and narrate a scene like the Batida scene, and negotiate the translation of its localised spaces to its globalised configurations. I'm also thinking of the designation of Quinta do Mocho as a social neighbourhood, and thinking of how this further connects Batida to grime, footwork and baile funk. This is what Marfox means, after all, when he says this is our grime. There are concerns about a too swift move from the local to the global. Some of the DJs voice concern about the scene changing as it becomes well known. And similar concerns come from residents who have tourists traipsing past their houses, peering through their doorways and windows, treating them as spectacles. There's also a recognition that the forced segregation brought about by social policies was and would be much worse than this new attempt at translating experience. The way to reassemble the social for many is through the global translation of the spaces and places and cultural practices of the neighbourhood for the benefit of those who would otherwise perpetuate divisions through fear and prejudice. This is translation as education. To connect this to my starting point of thinking through responses to Batida, translation can be thought of as a route to cosmopolitanism, in the sense that Kwame Anthony Appiah develops the term. The members of the Príncipe team, like those of fellow label Enchufada, recognize the inequalities at work between the metropolitan centres and the colonies that helped make them so. Yet they also draw strength from the cultural aspects of the Lusophone Black Atlantic and simultaneously tap into the networks of present and future. The music they release is tied to place and circumstance, but also Afrofuturist, an ever-expanding collection of what Kodwo Eshun has called sonic fictions. As the 2016 Príncipe compilation Mambos Leves d'Outro Mundo would have it, this is music from another world, both in emanating from a world that had virtually no representation in mainstream Portuguese culture and in being futuristically otherworldly. It's also otherworldly in its multi-mundiality, sampling musics and beats from all over. For me, says DJ Marfox, the most important quality of this music is that it allows me to go and drink from other sound sources and integrate what I want. You can influence yourself and draw upon other strains of music and use what you see fit. I think that's the most fantastic and admirable quality. We heard something of this in DJ Leacock's track earlier on with its koto samples. Other examples would include Marfox's Swarangami and Nydia Minaj's remix of Elsa Soares. Perhaps the strange cargoes of new dance genres can be more easily unloaded when the unloading is taken on by seasoned hands or feet. As Danwa Singh Bra has noted of Chicago footwork, the sense memory London carries of jungle meant that it was suitably primed for the arrival of footwork. The dance floor, as a space of cosmopolitan encounter, is where translation happens. And not only the dance floor. To play the vinyl records or the digital files in any situation, home, car, office, neighbourhood, through open windows, across almost empty streets, in playgrounds and hanging out spots, is to summon to affect the dance-primed mind. Once we've established dancing as a dominant way of translating the sounds of Batida, or indeed any other form of music, we're ready to reconsider the written response to the music. Despite the declarations of strangeness, in fact the music finds journalists who are quite ready to use language to express what they hear as new in Batida by using terms with which their readers are familiar. A common strategy is to combine existing terms in new combinations, which sounds a little bit like dancing, which means perhaps, building on Bra's identification of the architectural qualities of Chicago footwork, that writing about music really is dancing about architecture after all. Which dancers will get to delineate the architecture for Batida? What comes after translation? The music has had its moment of quick-fire journalistic response, had its strangeness marked, measured and metaphorized. It now awaits the more extensive, multi-stranded narratives that have begun to emerge around grime and British bass culture, and around other elements of global bass and DJ cultures. The shape of its journey is still to be negotiated, the voices of its various actors still to be heard. Thank you.